I'm so excited to have Dr. Jennifer Fraser here today. She is the author of The Bullied Brain. She has a really great TEDx. She's so passionate about, she's as passionate about this topic as I am. I am so excited to find somebody who's like ready to carry the flag and the soapbox about childhood trauma and the huge impact it has on our life outcomes. We were just talking before you guys all came in about why is this like information not making it to everybody and anybody? This is so important and so impactful, and yet it's not common knowledge that your brain is doing all kinds of things in early childhood that set it up for life later. And if those are not the good things, those are not the right things, you can have so many problems, and that is not what we want for our community, for our friends, for our family members. And so I'm super excited that Jennifer's going to talk about this. I am going to do the slides. So hopefully, let me get this on slideshow view. And hopefully that looks good. And that means that I won't be able to kind of see what's going on in the audience, but I have the wonderful Kelsey Hopkins here and Deb Falzoy's here, and they are going to help with the chat and muting anything that needs to be done. The screen looks good, right? Yeah. All right, Jennifer, I am ready to turn it over to you. Thank you.
All right. Well, hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming today. This, as Amy said, this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, which we'll talk about how that happened to me. And basically what I want to talk about today is, as Amy said, we have a whole pile of information that is sitting right here. And as all of you know, began with the ACE study in the late 1990s. So we're already in 2024. And what frustrates me, and I'm sure many of you, is that we have this knowledge here, but society is operating here. And we are just not somehow bringing the two key things together. So I believe, on good days, I believe that we are really at a tipping point. I think we're at a tipping point into a scientific revolution. And the scientific revolution, typically throughout history, when these huge epic changes in our lives and our society and our cultures and how we live and treat each other and understand medicine and understand how our social relational world is constructed, all of these things, when there's a big change about to happen, it takes a lot of people like yourselves to make it happen. There has to be the early adopters, and that's what you would all be, or it just doesn't happen. And you have to advocate, as Amy was saying, you have to carry that flag and you have to be up on the soapbox, even when it's uncomfortable and even when people ridicule you or don't believe you or ignore you, whatever, we still have to do it. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I really actually wanted to tap into, we can jump to the next slide, Amy. I wanted to tap into your knowledge. So, and I'll explain to you where I'm coming from and what I've been doing, but I also am really keen to hear what you're doing and what you see as the problems and obstacles that we're facing. And so again, I see the screen, and then I just have a bar where I can see some people. So Kelsey, I think is gonna, and Deb maybe too, is gonna really keep an eye on people, but jump up and down, use your emoji hand, raise your hands is a really quick way to show, be ready to unmute. I wanna hear from people today. And I want you all obviously to hear each other. So I feel like we've reached a place in education, and education is my wheelhouse. I feel like we are in a place where trauma-informed has become very mainstream. It's talked about, it's understood, it's something that will come up in meetings all the time. We talk about it in the workplace. People need to be trauma-informed in the ways that they act and do things. We get that. Where I work is more in the next level, which is neuroscience combined with pedagogy. And I'll explain more about that as we go along. But what I ended up doing when I wrote my book, The Bullied Brain, and actually even earlier in 2015, a book I wrote came out called Teaching Bullies. And it was I wrote it really under a kind of intense PTSD. So I'm laughing. I'm not laughing at PTSD. I'm laughing at myself. It is, I wrote it with a great deal of urgency because I honestly believed, and this is kind of sad, I believed that as soon as it was published, everything would change because people would understand how serious bullying of children was by the adults in their lives, especially adults in positions of trust and authority and caretaking, such as parents, caregivers, teachers, coaches, doctors. And of course, nothing changed. That was in 2015. And so then that was the first time that I really came across the neuroscience in terms of my research. It had been in my life previously as a parent with one of my kids, but I hadn't put two and two together. And so when I started to look at the neuroscience, I started to shift my thinking from trauma informed into trauma responsive because we have neuroplasticity, which means our brain's ability to change and get stronger or weaker depending on what we do. I was like, if the brain is innately wired to repair and recover, why aren't we fixing trauma? Why aren't we repairing it? Why do we act like it's a bit of a prison sentence and it's going to ruin your life and you're never going to get better when we know that that's not true? We know that's not true. It's like someone has diabetes and we're like, well, I'm really sorry, it's game over for you when we have insulin. Like it's that crazy. So I'm very much in the world of trauma responsive because I'm a teacher, an educator at heart, and I have been for 20 years. I then started to think to myself, well, I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not a clinician. I'm not a counselor. Trauma responsive, why do we let it happen in the first place? As a teacher, it's like not teaching kids how to navigate traffic. It's like saying, good luck with those cars and trucks and bicycles going all a gazillion miles an hour. Do your best. And I really hope you don't get hurt. But if you do, we're going to fix you. We're going to repair you because we know your brain can absolutely, and it's in charge of your body, get your brain and body better. Your nervous system can repair. Teachers don't do that. Teachers teach how to prevent it from happening in the first place. We teach about traffic. We teach about how kids should treat each other so that they don't hurt them. We still have a huge taboo around talking about adults who hurt kids, but that can also be addressed. So I've shifted, and this will be informing my next book, into trauma, what I call trauma preventative. And then I know there's going to be people, I know one personally, Deb, is looking really for legal change. And I 100% support that. And I do everything I can to support those legal advocates. I think it's absolutely critical. So I'm going to talk a lot about the science part of things. That does not mean I don't believe in the legal part of things. I think that the way our society is and the way it's set up, people have to be held accountable for what they do. But I also think there's a bigger picture on that, which we'll talk more about down the road. Okay, so let's jump to, so really my question to you, and I want you to start thinking about this now, as we go through, we'll stop and have discussion. But really, my question to myself is, why is it so hard to change? And I want you to think about that too and share with me your knowledge and advice and insights into that. So just put it in the back of your mind for our whole talk today. And I'm going to zero in at intervals and just be like, okay, here's X. What is stopping society and culture and education and law and science even from changing this? Okay, so we can look at the next slide. So yes, as we talked about, really what I'm asking you to think about is, what are the hurdles? What are the things that block us? What are the obstacles? We've known about ACEs for 20 years. You guys are all ACEs experts. I wrote about ACEs in one chapter of my book, The Bullied Brain, which came out last year. So we're very trauma informed. Dr. Vincent Felitti and Dr. Robert Anda got us very trauma informed. And they told us that it was incredibly high stakes. They said it is, chronic illness in midlife, it's shortened lifespan. I mean, it couldn't be more serious, not to mention all of the other tragic aspects to it of substance abuse and suicidal ideation and anxiety and depression, and like just the endless suffering that people have from these childhood 0 to 18 experiences at the hands of adults. And so I would just think that this would have changed the whole world, but here we are in 2024, and we haven't changed child abuse. In actual fact, that really unfortunate statistic. I do a lot of battling for child safety in Canada. And in Canada, the Canadian Centre for Child Protection has just come up with data saying that now sexual abuse of children, students in our schools in Canada, is on the rise. Like, how is that possible? That's just an abject failure on everything that we're going to be talking about today. And Canada is really in my bad book. So if you want to say anything bad about my country, please speak up. I would greatly enjoy it. So what are the hurdles that you see? What are the hurdles that you face when we're trying to implement this knowledge and make this change? So we can jump to the next slide, Amy. I also want to signal that because of ACEs, we talk about childhood adversity in the home, and that tends to be even how our legal and child protection structures are set up. Certainly in Canada. So if you're talking about child abuse, they are quick to be like Children and Family Services and call them, and a social worker will be sent out. But if you say that a teacher is abusing children at school, it's all of a sudden you're facing the impossible task of daring to even speak the taboo that a teacher might be abusive or a coach in a sports organization might be abusive. So what's happened in the last year or so, and this is why I was called to Ottawa, to the capital, there is an absolute national crisis in Canada about abuse in sport. It's from the grassroots all the way up to our national level teams. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of athletes have been reporting the abuse being done to them. And as you will all just be like, yeah, business as usual, the government just seems unable to do anything effective to halt this, to legislate differently, to have a different process. Like, it's incredible. It's like they're stuck. So watching this unfold firsthand has been amazing. So when we talk from a brain perspective, it doesn't matter where the adult is. It doesn't matter if it's in the home or if it's in school, if it's in the gym, if it's at a church. It doesn't matter where the adversity occurs. It's absolutely, as you all know, devastating to brain and body. And so that is part of one of the big legal changes that needs to happen. We know, even in the neuroscience and the brain science and nervous system research and the medical research, that even bullying by peers, so not adults in positions of authority and trust and power, just peers, that is enough to do significant harm to the brain. And every single time I say the doom and gloom, significant harm to the brain, you don't need to worry, you don't need to feel badly, because once again, our brains, just like our bodies, are innately wired to repair and recover. They are wired to get better. And we will talk at the end of our talk about a whole bunch of research on different ways in which we can strengthen our brains and recover from any type of trauma that's happened to us. And so it's really the messaging, even though we have to discuss the hard part, the messaging overall in this talk is empowering and inspiring. It's not expensive to get your brain back on track, and it's not hard to do. It's actually very common sense things, which we'll talk about. So please don't feel like, oh, this is such bad news. It's not. It's ultimately good. Okay, so we can jump to the next slide. So as an educator, as somebody who has a PhD in comparative literature, the question, the obvious question is, why am I writing about neuroscience? So first of all, most people don't know that when you're trained to do a PhD in comparative literature, what you're trained to do is take different discourses, different languages, different lenses on how the world is seen. You take these different lenses and you put them into the arena, out of their silos, into the arena, and see if the conversation changes. And so in my first book, I was writing about mentoring. I was writing about initiation. I was looking at sociology and anthropology and literature. So that was my first book many years ago. My second book, I was looking at literature in the modernist era and how they were understanding pedagogy. So I was looking at like literary greats in the modernist era in England and what they thought about child rearing, like child rearing practices and the ways in which parents and schools raised and taught children, and then how it was manifesting itself in terms of world wars and aggression and so on. And so that, again, very sort of different combination of unusual things. You put them into the arena though, and you see a very different world. So it really wasn't that much of a leap from my point of view to say, I mean, what happened to me in my personal life, I was working at a school and students were reporting directly to me that they were being abused by a very small number of teachers who were my colleagues. And the headmaster, there was a private school. So the headmaster of the school sort of told me, kind of gave me like the shake of the head, like, why are you so concerned about this physical and emotional abuse that's being done? It's just old school coaching. So the beginning part of the gaslighting really was that it's not a big deal. Why are you making a big deal about it? It was sort of, I mean, this was all on email. It was told to me that these teachers didn't understand that what they were doing was harmful. And they were really sorry and they didn't mean it to happen. And then the next email I get after that is actually they've decided that the teachers are innocent and they're innocent until proven guilty. So, I mean, it was just this kaleidoscope of like every single time I turned around, they were changing the story. So I knew there was something really wrong with how it was being handled. And when that happens for me, my go-to place is research. I'm not a big fan of opinions. I'm not a believer. So I wanted to know, well, what are the, like, if you think homophobic slurs and swearing and yelling in the face and scenes of public humiliation, and then when the child tries to get away, you grab them and hold them in for more, you think that's old school coaching? Let's see what the experts say. So I looked at the psychologists, I looked at the doctors, I looked at the psychiatrists, I looked at the neuroscience. And when I hit the science, I was honestly, I've never been more shocked because what I found was, and it's still not widely known. I've been working on this for over 10 years, but I know for a fact it's not widely known because I present on it all the time. This type of behavior, especially from an adult to a child and an adult in a position of trust and authority, it's not a random encounter. This adult has been empowered to tell you what your value is. They're a teacher. They open doors for you and they close them. They assess your character and they put it in writing. They tell you your value. And if you are daily being treated to this kind of an onslaught, it does significant damage to your brain. The damage can be seen on brain scans. It's physical damage to brain architecture. It leaves neurological scars. And so that became my mission to say, well, I'm a teacher. I'm an award-winning teacher 20 years. How do I not know this? It was a real like self-identity crisis. I was like, why am I teaching when I don't know anything about the human brain? I mean, the human brain is the seat of how we learn. I'm a teacher and I don't know about the brain. What? And so that just set me on my mission. So we can go to the next slide. So it's one thing to research and write and advocate. It's another to become a whistleblower. I am not a whistleblower type at all. Whistleblowers are very unusual people. They're a tiny fraction of the population. When we ended up being interviewed in national news in Canada by the most widely read newspaper and then interviewed on an investigative journalism program on TV, the Pulitzer Prize winning reporter said to my son, who, if you look at the picture, he's on my left-hand side, the guy with the plaid shirt who's in color. That's my son, Montgomery. And he spoke to the newspaper as well as these other two students at the school. The other student, there were 10 more, but there were 13 students altogether, but they wouldn't speak up to the news and put their name because it's so risky. They didn't want to ruin university. They didn't want to be alienated in our community. They didn't want to take a really bad hit for the team. But The reporter said there's only 1% of the population that will speak to national news. And he said it doesn't matter how severe the injustice is. I've heard the most appalling stories you've ever heard, but most people will not speak up. And so, I mean, watching my son be a whistleblower and watching these other young um, people be whistleblowers made me feel that the least I could do was also speak up. Um, there's a lot of trauma associated with it because, as experts who write about whistleblowing say, you get punished for the crime of telling the truth. And you have to speak the truth in a community that prefers the lie. And there's a lot of really interesting researches, I'm sure all of you know, on why people would rather listen to the lie. It happens in workplaces all the time. It's called institutional complicity, and we talk about that. And that's one of the things that people are working hard to see stopped. But there's also complicity on the part of the employees. So my colleagues, my friends, they turned against me because I was making them feel something for their brains, anyways, and their bodies so uncomfortable. And when it's your livelihood, it's terrifying. I mean, I was terrified. You do not bite the hand that feeds you. You do not turn on the organization, the institution that pays your bills, that pays your salary, that pays your pension. You just don't do that. It's short-sighted. And I was able to resign in protest. Lots of people don't have that luxury. It was, I don't want to minimize it. It was really hard what we did, but anyways, we had to do it. And because our son was on the line. Now, if our son's well-being and mental health wasn't on the line, I'm not sure I would have had the courage to do it, in all honesty. And so I have a lot of empathy for people who look away, for people who look down, for people who protect their jobs. And as you all know, in the literature, it's referred to as a blindness. They literally can't see what's happening because to see it is to be caught in the position of you're supposed to do the right thing, but you can't do the right thing. That space of impossibility, that catch-22, is unbearable. And so people have what's called as a blindness to betrayal. And there's absolutely fabulous research on it. But we get so angry sometimes when we're in the whistleblower role, or we're speaking up and nobody else is, and we say to ourselves, how dare they? How could they? How can they betray me this way? How can they turn on me? Well, they have to. Psychologically, that's the only way they can survive. They have to have blindness to betrayal, the institution's betrayal of all the values they propose to have, or they can't survive. And we're going to talk a lot today about survival and the different ways in which our brain and body manifest. And then it's a complicated thing to navigate, and it's a complicated thing to legislate because all of us are having our reactions. We're all traumatized by what's happening. So anyhow, this is how I ended up being a whistleblower, only because of my son, Montgomery. So yeah, we can jump to the next slide, maybe. So I'm really, after having done a ton of research, and just to give you an idea, I'm not a scientist. It was really, really hard work for me to read the research and to understand it and then write about it. But I was helped by one of the world's leading neuroscientists, Dr. Michael Merzenich, just out of the kindness of his heart and because he's passionate about seeing children far better protected from the trauma that they are exposed to. And he's one of the most highly awarded neuroscientists in the world. He's referred to by his colleagues as the father of neuroplasticity. So he's 80 now. In 2016, he won the Kavli Prize for Neuroscience, which is one of the highest awards you can get in Europe. And he's an absolute genius. And by a series of good fortune for me, he took on the Bullied Brain as a passion project, and he read every word to make sure I hadn't made any mistakes, which would have been easy for me to do, not being a brain scientist. And when he finished, he sent me an email and he said, the Bullied Brain is the most completely scientifically thorough treatment of the subject on planet Earth. And so I was just so lucky that, yeah, I mean, he was there to help me if it wasn't, but just that, really, it was like just a mother's passion. I needed to know everything about the science because I was watching my son traumatized, and I needed to know how to help him, and I needed to be able to tell him what was going on in his brain and body. And so this is really the origin behind all this. And then being a teacher, my automatic instinct is like, well, I don't want to keep this knowledge to myself. I want everybody to know this because it's going to help so many people. So the brain science is really exciting in that it shifts us from being trauma informed to trauma responsive, because we know the brain has neuroplasticity and it can repair. As we talked about, but it bears repetition because the brain learns by repetition at timed intervals. And that's why we need to keep circling back and saying these things again so that they really embed for all of us. The research is very, very clear, and it's at least 20 years extensive, peer-reviewed, replicated research. And the reason I say that is because at times people will comment in on what I'm saying and doing. They'll be like, this is junk science. And I will write back and be like, no, this is Harvard. So you can trust me when I tell you it's peer reviewed, it's replicated, it's extensive, 20 years at least. It documents that the brain's innately wired to repair and recover. And so that means every single kid we know, every adult we're worried about, everyone who is being targeted and harmed, we can get their brains and bodies better, which is really exciting. I have found in my work that if I can't show people the harm to the brain, then they are not convinced. Human beings are highly visual creatures. If we don't see our brains, we tend to ignore them. So one of the things that I try to do is get the brain very, very visual for people. So Amy, we can jump to the next slide. The way we can see our brains, as you all know, is through non-invasive technology. And that has been the huge leap. We now have EEG, which looks at the electrical waves of the brain. We have, there's a whole bunch, but the main ones are MRI and fMRI. MRI takes pictures, like an X-ray kind of takes pictures of your bones, and an fMRI takes a video. It's the brain in movement. So we now know, therefore, that when we're talking about psychological safety and we're advocating for it in the law, we're also talking about brain safety. And as we'll talk about more without getting too carried away right now, we're also talking about body safety. When someone is being bullied or abused or harassed in the workplace, in all the various forms it takes, you don't have to touch the body. All the things that we do to each other can cause significant scarring and harm to the brain, physical harm to the brain, as well as scarring, physical harm to the body. It's invisible because it's the organs. It's hurting your heart, it's hurting your gut, it's hurting your blood vessels. It's really doing damage to your body. We just can't see the damage. It's not visible to us. And so we tend to minimize, ignore, not understand, etc. But the science tells us, and especially the non-invasive technology shows us the damage being done. So abused and bullied brains, even brains bullied by peers in childhood, amazingly enough, they show neurological scars. So that's one of our key takeaways today. Amy, we can jump to the next slide. So I just want to go over really fast what makes a brain unsafe. If you think of a brain at work, our laws privilege physical harm to the body. So our laws take much more seriously punching someone in the face or sexually assaulting them, their body. In actual fact, though, when somebody is sexually assaulted in their brain, like think cyberbullying, deep fake porn stuff that people do now with AI, think about stalking, things that do not touch the body, grooming of a child, all of these types of things do very, very serious harm to brain and body. And you can see it if you're using the right tests. And same thing with things like emotional abuse, like ignoring somebody does unbelievable harm to their brain, not inviting them, social relational things like rumors, you're not touching their body, but the law is dragging its feet. It is unable to grasp the concept that the brain and the body via the nervous system are extremely harmed by all kinds of behaviors that do not touch the body. So super fast, of course, physical and sexual abuse that targets the body is very serious, but so is emotional abuse in all of its forms. So is psychological abuse and verbal abuse and neglect. Emotional neglect is deadly. So like, do we need to go through this yelling, berating, shaming, ignoring, refusing feedback, isolating, ostracizing, manipulating, lying, gaslighting, treating unfairly, privileging some while punishing others? I mean, this is this is the heart, as we all know, of misogyny. This is the heart of racism. This is the heart of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and homophobia. It's the absolute core behaviors that we try to manifest huge apparatuses around and we have throughout history to try and justify why we can bully one group. And we will talk ultimately about what's happening in the brain when we do target a particular group and attack them and try to justify it with all kinds of sham things that we do that are embarrassingly dumb when you take a look at them. But this, this is the heart of everything wrong in society. It's essentially bullying behaviors, stealing someone else's ideas or work, threatening somebody, blocking their opportunities, overworking them, dehumanizing conditions and treatment, emotional neglect, etc. Sorry for all that depressing information. So just to give you, this was recently used at Yale University, this just very visually powerful scan. And we have a tendency to think of PTSD as something that you get if you go to war. And yes, of course, you do get it when you go to war, but you can also get it from being absolutely traumatized at work by a narcissist or a psychopath or a Machiavellian or somebody who's just a plain bully who's having their own anxiety attack about how they present. It doesn't matter. You can get PTSD from that. Of course, let's just do a quick reminder that, and we're used to talking about post-traumatic stress disorder. We know toxic or chronic stress is absolutely devastating to the brain and body via the nervous system. It's devastating. It's a silent killer. But we also have to remember, whenever we're talking neuroscience, we are automatically talking post-traumatic growth, because you can get stronger after trauma. As long as you're doing evidence-based practices, which we're going to talk about at the end of this talk, as long as you're doing evidence-based practices, you can absolutely recover your baseline health, brain and body from trauma, and you can get stronger. And there's tons of science to back that up. So I'm just going to get, people always ask me this question, so I'm going to take 30 seconds just to give you a quick idea. People are like, well, what are you talking about when you're saying bullying and abuse really harm brain architecture? So the brain, I'm sure as you all know, the brain operates as a vast network. Everything that the brain is doing, it's doing it in this is the most complex thing on the planet that is known. So it's always interacting in an inextricable way. That said, when you're studying the brain as a brain scientist or psychologist or psychiatrist or doctor, you can see parts of the brain and you can talk about them. It doesn't mean that they work in isolation or that one thing happens in one part of the brain. It's a vast network interacting. That said, we can talk about parts of the brain. So in somebody who has profound PTSD, you might find that their amygdala, this is the part of the brain that's very much about the threat response system. It's like an air traffic control tower. It's always looking for danger. The amygdala, so for example, there's a really interesting study in England of the amygdala of people who murdered somebody. So they did research in the prisons. They found that these individuals who murdered someone had enlarged amygdalas, which makes a lot of sense. You guys are trauma experts. You don't become a murderer by accident. You become a murderer when you grow up in a lot of violence, when you grow up in a lot of danger, when you grow up having to fight to survive, having to carry a weapon to survive. If we don't have this enlarged amygdala, it's a luxury. We didn't grow up in those conditions. And so that'll be one of the things that we see. Another thing that we'll see in people that have been targeted for all kinds of workplace bullying in the home or at school or at church or in sports, their hippocampus will be shrunken. The hippocampus is the seat of learning and memory and tagging memories for short and long-term
emotional. It has to do with abuse on the brain.
Keep going. Yeah. The hippocampus, if you look at it and somebody has been exposed to a lot of trauma, it will be quite shrunken because it's being impacted by so much cortisol. Cortisol is the stress hormone, super healthy, meant to be there. It goes shooting up in your brain and body when you are under threat. And we're going to talk more about that later, but just keep it in the back of your mind. The last thing any of us wants is lots of cortisol in our brain and body. It's in the 21st century, It does not serve us well. It was designed by evolution to keep us safe from predators and other huge dangers like that, like a tornado or something. And having it regularly spiking up because we're afraid of a financial thing, we're afraid of somebody at work who's always putting us down. We're afraid of someone who's threatening us in our personal life. I mean, those constant stressors are terrible for brain and body and nervous system. One of the things they see on brain scans is that the corpus callosum, which is a bundle of fibers in between the left and right hemisphere, it is eroded, like it's lost myelination. And myelination is an insulator that the brain has that helps it communicate electronically very, very quickly. Our left and right hemisphere need to be talking to each other all the time. And if the connecting part between them doesn't have a lot of insulation on it, it means it can't be super efficient and effective. So it's a really hard impact on the brain when the corpus callosum is eroded by bullying and a trauma and abuse. And then finally, our nervous system, just the nervous system, if we think of it as the key brain stem nerves that go into the body from our brain, it's how our brain and our body talk to each other. If the nervous system is constantly on high alert, it's constantly in a fight, flight, freeze, fawning state, it's so unhealthy. It hurts the body, it hurts the heart, it hurts the gut, it hurts the brain. It's just amazing how devastating it is. And I don't know if you know the term neuroception, but neuroception is the way it's unconscious. It's the way in which all of us right now are listening and talking. And, well, I'm talking, you're about to start talking, but we're all listening on an unconscious level to the safety in the room. We are, without even thinking about it, at lightning speed, our neuroception is trying to figure out just how safe we are. If we're feeling really safe, then it allows us to do lots of creativity and problem solving and conversation and social emotional connection and so on. If it doesn't feel safe, if our neuroception, our nervous system has decided that we're not actually very safe, it's starting to make its plan. It's starting to change the physiology and the brain behaviors so that we can get ourselves to a safe state. So it's like a seesaw that's constantly going on. You guys might know the terms sympathetic nervous system, parasympathetic nervous system. Yeah, it's that same kind of seesaw. It's just a slightly different vocabulary. So you can see here on this brain scan, the radical, shocking difference between a PTSD brain and a healthy brain. There's a really big difference. Just remember, there's nothing stopping us from taking that PTSD brain and doing the hard work, the deliberate practice to return it to the healthy brain. It can be done. Okay, let's jump to the next slide. Okay, so really quick, just follow up all forms of bullying and abuse, including all the ones that do not touch the body, can do physical harm to brain architecture and function. The damage is visible on brain scans. There's extensive peer-reviewed replicated research that documents the negative impact all forms of bullying and abuse have on brains. And I really emphasize this because in my world, and probably in yours as well, people will try to minimize non-physical abuse, and they're making a huge mistake when they do that. So we can jump to the next slide. Again, just a reminder, we're going over this one more time. The brain and body are inextricably entwined. They're always communicating. When one suffers, so does the other. Yeah, we went over the brain impacts. We could have done that for the body, but I just figure everybody's more aware of that. So we can jump to the next slide. So my big question to you, and we started our talk with this, and we're going to start to look at it as a group, is why aren't we changing? And this is a quote from my book. I'm quoting in my book two social workers who are on the ground seeing what's happening to kids every single day. And they just put it so powerfully and so eloquently. I just want to share the quote with you. And it's why I put it in my book. If 20 million people were infected by a virus that caused anxiety, impulsivity, aggression, sleep problems, depression, respiratory and heart problems, vulnerability to substance abuse, antisocial and criminal behavior, and school failure, we would consider it an urgent public health crisis. But because it is bullying, abuse, and trauma, we don't do anything. And you know, I have so many times heard people say to me, like think 12 years ago, that there's no way the laws can change. And there's no, me talking about a scientific revolution is very melodramatic and pointless. It's not going to happen, not in my lifetime. Well, I can tell you right now, I'm 57 and I have seen 3 full-on scientific revolutions in my lifetime with all the legal changes that went with it. The first was seatbelts. When I grew up, we did not wear seatbelts, and children certainly didn't wear seatbelts, and no one had ever heard of a car seat. Well, none of us now would ever drive without putting on our seatbelt. We would never let our children be in a car without a seatbelt on. And if we had a little one or a baby, we'd be using car seats. So that's scientific revolution number 1. The statistics showed us we were safer. The second one is smoking. When I grew up, everybody smoked. The doctor smoked when he wrote your prescription, your parents smoked, your teacher smoked, your professor smoked at university, you name it, everyone smoked. It was normal. And we believed, really believed, we believed the marketing that if we smoked, we would be stronger and tougher and more sophisticated like Hollywood actresses, and we'd be more independent. And in actual fact, it turns out that was all not true. All smoking did for us was made us weaker, sicker, and more susceptible, way more susceptible to cancer. So we changed. Look at how the laws changed. You can't smoke in an airplane or a building or 20 meters outside of a building or whatever. No one's allowed to smoke anymore. And vast majority of people have made that shift for their own personal health. We'd never smoke in a room and expose our kids to secondhand smoke or in a car, never. So, I mean, again, a massive scientific revolution and all the laws changed. And then the third one is the fitness revolution, the aerobics revolution that happened in the 80s, when all of a sudden workplaces were like, oh, they were building gyms, they were sending their people to gyms down the street with a free pass. They realized that our own personal health could be massively improved if we were jumping around and dancing and exercising and going to the weight room, et cetera, et cetera. That was absolutely new, and it changed everything. So I think we're on a tipping point. I do think we can change. I think this is a virus, trauma, abuse, and bullying. This virus needs to be addressed in urgent fashion and with lots of legal changes and cultural changes. Okay, so we can just jump to the next one. We're getting very close to me asking you to jump in and help. But just one final piece here is, why do we still talk about mental illness, which we all know has a big stigma attached to it, but we don't talk about injury to the brain? So I'm a big stickler for getting us way more accurate on how we talk about this. So when people talk about, oh, bullying and abuse hurt the brain, I'm like, yeah, it's a brain injury. They damage the brain. It can be seen on a brain scan. We can use the brain scan if we need to document what has been done. So, if people manifest mental illness, specialists might not even check. You might go to the doctor and say, I'm depressed or I have anxiety or suicidal ideation, and they might give you medicine, but they also might not look at your brain. And this really has to change. We can do lots of brain tests. We don't even have to use an EEG, which maybe that's, it costs about $500. It's expensive to do an EEG. But it probably costs the same as it does to do an ECG and look at the heart, or to do an X-ray, or to do any of these, an ultrasound. I mean, it's just, once again, a medical measure of what's going on in the brain and body. So we need to make that shift where we start understanding that there's something wrong with the brain, and that's okay because we can fix it. There's no character flaw or weakness or anything. It's just an illness. And most people who have these kinds of illnesses come by them honestly. So the advent of non-invasive technology allows us to scan brains, measure activity, conduct a battery of tests to see how well the brain operates in terms of processing speed, focus, working memory, and so on. And we will talk more about how that's actually something all of us can do. And that's something that all of us can change very inexpensively and easily in our lives, which is pretty exciting. So we can jump to the next slide. So when we're talking brain science, we also start to understand that psychological safety, poor Deb has to listen to me talk about this all the time and have temper tantrums about it. When we're talking about psychological safety, we are also talking about brain safety, which is neurological safety. I mean, why would we protect the body at work with helmets and steel-toed shoes and safety vests? Why are we protecting bodies at work and not brains? It doesn't make any sense. So Safety is also the driving force. It's the most important thing to our nervous system, reminding all of us our nervous system is how our brain and body are communicating through cranial nerves, most significantly the polyvagal nerve. So psychological safety is also physiological safety. You know, we can see a broken leg, but we can't see a heart that is getting damaged day in, day out in an abusive workplace. The gut getting damaged day in and day out, so the person gets an ulcer in the workplace. We can't see those things, so we tend to dismiss them or not understand them, or not teach or educate in the workplace about them, not have good policies, not have good laws. It's really crazy. We've got the science and we need to change because of that. So we can jump to the next one, Amy. So my big question to you, and I just want to open up the floor. I want to hear from you. We all want to hear from each other. What are the hurdles that you see in your work? Why aren't we moving from a trauma-informed to a trauma-informed or trauma-responsive, trauma-preventative world? Because we've got the brain science now. And what holds us back from it? If we know brains can repair, why don't we want to make that a part of everything? So those are my, I give you, take some time, think, like write down on paper, or you put things into your phone, jump right in if you've got ideas. I'm really keen to hear everybody on this topic.
Put us back in gallery view for a second.
Perfect.
Hoping that people might, I see in the chat, people have some thoughts and experience, but jump right in, anyone who'd like to offer something. Kathy.
Yeah, so I
Okay,
work
Kathy,
with
raising your hand.
incarcerated youth, and well, I've done different work, but I've worked with incarcerated youth, and one of the things I've seen is if you have to look at the trauma that brought them into the system, then people can feel like they're not being held accountable. So they want to focus on holding them accountable, and they can't see that you can do both. They can't see that you can, you can have sympathy um, and I think also, so I see that, and then I also see abuse sometimes in those systems, and I think that's supported because, well, it's hard to hire people to work with them. If we fired them, so I just see a lot of wanting to. What I see is sort of I look at it like a line, and we want to assume people are victims or perpetrators. And when I worked in the criminal justice system and juvenile justice system, I'm like, wow, that's so not true. In fact, when I've worked with most people in prisons or in jails are actually nonviolent, but the ones that are violent usually have the worst abuse histories.
Yeah, that is an excellent point. It's because I think that's a really important point. It's something we're actually going to talk about, so I want to hear more about that. It's a cycle. What makes abuse so hard is that victim is perpetrator is victim. We're just going in this huge circle. But so I have some ideas on that I want to run past you later coming up. And I just like hold on to these thoughts right now to see if would this make a difference? Like I'm really just throwing it out there as a big question. It's something that I'm actually working on, and I don't know if it's going to work. So I'm really curious what you think, what your experience has been. One of the things I find really interesting, I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but and again, I'm always hopeful. I think there's this tipping point happening. San Quentin in California, one of the most notorious prisons out there, they have now changed their name to San Quentin Rehabilitation Center. And they are asking people who have experience, especially with criminal justice, with young people, to send in their plans and ideas and so on. So, I mean, that's just a real, that just shows there's a shift happening. And if you read the scientists on this, like someone like Dr. Michael Merzenich is very engaged right now, and he just cannot fathom how you would take a young person without a violent offense or with a violent offense and you wouldn't rehabilitate them, when we know that, just as you said, Kathy, it's a traumatized brain. Why are we not helping these people get better? Why are we locking them up in this kind of medieval prison system that we all know doesn't work? And yes, this is the complicating thing. Of course, safety has to be the priority. We can't have these people going out and victimizing somebody. That's wrong too. But there's got to be a middle ground where, we do things differently for sure.
Want to go back to slide? Does anybody else want to jump in? There's definitely some good things in the chat along the lines of what you said, Jennifer, about it, the profit, people in power are often fear losing their power, or right, like abuse is how they maintain power. It's definitely something I see all the time. Like the response to trauma really perpetuates it, right? Because when you're harmed and you're hurt, you just go away. You kind of leave to lick your wounds. You try to do the things to get yourself better. And then, business as usual in the world of people doing harm. They're not, if the expectation is for the victims to be the ones who push to hold them accountable, we're working on that. But that's a big part of why it's so hard. People in power are not holding other people in power accountable. Just hearing your story in the school, I wish that wasn't so typical, but it feels really typical. I know people in this Zoom space right now who have tried to speak truth to power and hold people accountable, and they've ended up getting themselves so much more harmed. I don't think I can think of good examples of somebody who tried to call attention to harm from abuse and it went well. The person was like, the people were protected. The person was held responsible. I can't think of any times that happens. Sad to say. I see other people have their hands raised though, so I will be quiet and
No, I think that's very, very true. And what shocked me in my situation was the reason why they were covering up was because they'd been informed a year earlier that child abuse was occurring. So they let a year's worth of kids, including my son, be abused when they had full knowledge that these individuals were highly abusive. They hadn't informed parents. They hadn't protected kids. They hadn't given us the option of putting our child in an abusive program or not. So they had to do double time covering up because they were on the line themselves. And just like you say, Amy, and I'm sure everybody else has seen all the people that have, tried to speak truth to power, as you say, it's a part of, and this is where the prison problem happens, and this is where workplace abuse problems happen. We let it go on for so long that by the time we actually call it out and say enough is enough, it's entrenched. Everybody's done so much to cover it up. They've allowed the perpetrator to really ingrain these neural networks that are destructive, etc. But Bobby, you have your hand up. Jocelyn, you guys want to jump in?
Sure, I can jump in. This is so appropriate. I've got a letter right here. This is from my school saying that my daughter's coach, although it wasn't necessary that he said and did the things, it didn't reach the level of the laws for sexual abuse and bullying. And in fact, she should make sure she wears her sports bra more often, because that's why he commented on the fact that she was holding her boobs when she was running. So I'm in the midst of going, all right, we thought it was a fight against the coach, and it's what someone put in the chat. It's a system. So we're going against the whole system. We're going against the athletic director, the principal, the superintendent, and everyone, and saying, you're the problem. Actually, we thought it was the coach, but you guys are allowing this to be. And we just expected the athletic director to speak to the coach, and instead they went to the state. They went to Department of Children's Services in Massachusetts. My daughter had to go through horrible investigations and just continually being told it's not bad enough, it's not chronic enough, those comments aren't bad enough to warrant anything. So we've got quite a battle on our hands, and no one else is speaking up.
Yeah, I mean, in my line of work, on the one hand, that's textbook, and on the other, it's like if that was said in the workplace from a man to a woman, sorry, that would be pretty damn close to firing. But as you're allowed to say it to a child, is just mind blowing. We went to the police because our son was repeatedly assaulted. So he was the target of one of the coaches where our son's an auditory learner. So he's hypersensitized to sound. And this guy would stop all play. And hundreds of times this would happen. He would call our son up and he would start yelling in his face. And he would be yelling things like, do you even deserve to be here? Do you even like basketball? You're the best player out there. You're not trying. You know, why are you here? Like just an onslaught. And our son would hit a point, you know, he's a big guy. He's like 6'4". He's an athlete, but he couldn't stand it. He was way bigger than the coach, but he just couldn't stand the yelling in his face. And as the other boys described it, they said it was vicious. And they said they wanted to stop it, but they couldn't because it was a teacher. And so this guy, that our son would start to back away from him, and he'd reach out and grab his arm or his shirt and hold him in for more. And this is public humiliation happening in front of all the other boys. And so we went to the police. When we actually got the details on this, and we said, yeah, like this is assault. And the police officer went to Crown Counsel, which is the legal group in where I live, you have to go to. And Crown Counsel said, oh, well, if that happened in a bar, yeah, that if it happened in the workplace, that would be an assault for sure. But when a teacher does it to a student, that's motivation. I was like, wait a second. And this is why I've become so interested in gaslighting, because what you're facing, and obviously as a mom, you're going to fight Bobby tooth and nail. You don't care how high it takes. And you know what I learned with my son, and I'm sure you've all seen this too. And my husband reminds me all the time, it doesn't matter that nothing changed. We protected no kids. They covered everything up except for the national news story. They covered up, and no, the teachers were not held accountable. The whole system joined forces. There was a lot of political reasons why we don't have to get into, but they joined forces to protect this private school. And what's interesting to me is how good it was for our son to watch us fight. He saw us do everything in our power, and it told him that no matter what the corruption is, you have value, and your parents will fight, or your caseworker will fight, or your teacher will fight, or your coach will fight for you till the ends of the earth, because you have value and you matter. And they walk away with post-traumatic growth from that. So even if you lose, you're still doing the right thing by fighting. And yeah, everybody goes silent, as we talked about, because it's terrifying and they have lots of power to hurt people. Yeah. Anyways, Jocelyn, sorry.
Hi, so thank you so much, Jennifer, for doing this. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. And, you know, I concur with what you're saying. I worked at Edna Mahan Women's State Prison in New Jersey as the addiction treatment services coordinator and supervisor at a time when I had to whistleblow on the corruption in the institution and didn't know how substantial that was. Wound up becoming it was 2-time federal court cases, one for the sexual traumas being perpetuated on the women, and another for the physical trauma being perpetuated on them. And I knew aspects of what I was being told by the women were trying to keep me safe by only telling me so much. But to say, I mean, and people have arrested development by the time that they're in prison. So my type of family therapy work has always been, my joke was, you know, I did frontline work and a lot of my colleagues did mainline work and made money, but the frontline is where the services are needed. But I also say too, what's hard is, you know, whether it's social services or mental health, and especially with the families, there's a lot of shame that people don't want to come to terms with taking that aspect of accountability. Then there's the cost to take accountability, right? And the work that has to be done. I'd also say, you know, some of the things I wound up being forced out of my position at the Women's State Prison, but I also suffered, you know, vicarious and aspects of trauma too. So you wind up, and especially if you're really empathic and care about what's happening, you wind up developing. I have different aspects of neurological issues from all that stress, and the CPTSD and the gastrointestinal and endocrine. I wound up having cancer coming out of that. I'd only discovered till after the fact of like the efforts to advocate and fight for these things. And like you said, fight against a system that's well organized. I mean, Edna Mahan was nationally recognized up until the point that it did make national news of being a premier institution for women's corrections. And here, all, you know, other institutions have been like Edna in their corruption and violence. So what gets me is I have to work on self-forgiveness and practicing that. in all this is we didn't know about the neuroscience out in the fields, you know, when I was coming up and through it. We didn't understand the depth of connection with the gut brain connection and your health. So there are things that I know now that if I had known then, I've done self-care differently. And now I just kind of have to work with my health as is and try to find balance and help others. My goal and mission moving here on forward, I am in private practice and going for health psychology degree currently, is to help other professionals in the field so that they don't succumb to the traumatic stress as they're doing the work and the advocacy to change these systems.
Yeah, that is just so amazing. And it just makes me crazy that you're suffering by doing the right thing. It's like, you know, you're suffering because you're calling out like violence and sexual abuse. It's like, how does this happen? It's enough to make you crazy, completely crazy. I may circle back with you at some point because there's various groups that are wanting me to work with them, like probation, not probation, but the people who work in the jail, they have shortened lifespans. They last until around 56 because their work is so stressful. And then looking at juvenile justice as well, like my whole thing is what we want to do. And funnily enough, this is in Pennsylvania where we've got a lot of interest. What we want to do is, and I was going to talk about this at the end, but I'll just jump in and share now, is especially if we catch young brains have neuroplasticity up until the like intensive. We all have neuroplasticity until the day, our last day on the planet. But the young brains up to 25 have really intense ability to change their brains. And if we catch them early and we don't let them wire in all of this destructive behavior, then we can really rehabilitate with a lot of hope. And so what we want to do is take young people and give them the choice. Sure, you can do 6 months. It's your first time in jail, or you can do our brain fitness rehabilitation program intensively for 6 months with us. And if you then mentor other young people for another 6 months and you do some academic work with us and really learn sort of deep dive stuff into the brain, and you mentor another young person through the program, we're erasing your record and we're also going to certify you as a brain trainer. And then we're going to try and take some, I mean, this is all me being excessively hopeful probably, but we're going to take, you know, even if we got 30% of kids and saved them from the fate of going through the prison system, we would be doing something really helpful. So the idea would be taking responsibility to help place them in schools, in prisons, in juvenile justice centers, whatever, sports programs, the workplace. Everybody needs a personal trainer, but that somebody's knowledgeable about the brain. So just as you're saying, Jocelyn, if we knew that, if we had that knowledge back in the day, we're going to change how we protect ourselves, how we understand safety, how we keep our health paramount, despite the impulse to do the right thing, putting walls down against our empathy, because that's, you know, I'm sure everybody on this call is highly empathic, and that can be, I'm going to talk more about empathy down the road, but it can be something that makes you very vulnerable. It's a superpower, but it also makes you very vulnerable to harm. So anyway, that's a horrible story. God.
It's interesting because the history, if you go back and look at that women's prison at Mahan, like it started out, like corrections in America was restorative therapy based, and she established a working farm for women, young women that had kids out of wedlock and stuff in the like 19 teens into the 20s. And it was to help rehabilitate people. When the state took it over and it became the punitive correction system that we now have, that was not the mission of the original intent of these types of. So everything's just so turned extremely up.
Yeah, we definitely need to shift. Well, as a society, I mean, we're seeing it all over the world. All of us talk about things aren't going in a great direction right now, worldwide, and we have to turn the ship around, even though it feels like a difficult task. It has to be done. So should we go on? Do people want to take a break?
Bill had his hand up.
Break?
Bill had his hand up for a while now.
I don't see Bill, so maybe I have to switch over here. Please jump in.
Sure. Boy, I had to narrow this down. I've been taking copious notes, and I had to, like, when you asked the question, it's, you know, which one do I pick? Because they're all so important. I'm definitely going to go back, review this video, and like take all the notes that I can from it, because there's just so many important topics here. But for me, you asked, you know, why? We live in the greatest country in the world. You know, we're supposed to be tough. We're supposed to be strong. We're supposed to be powerful. Anywhere from sports to law enforcement to the military to corporations, whose bottom line is all about money. What you have to do to make sure that you make that money is keep everybody under your thumb. And that culture is pervasive everywhere, and other people pick it up. You know, and so, you know, trying to survive in that kind of environment all the time. Myself, I was a police officer for 10 years here in Worcester, and was abused the entire 10 years and bullied the entire 10 years because I refused to behave badly. And that turned into me being forced off the department, cheated out of my full disability retirement. My house has now been foreclosed on several times. I've been fighting that battle for 14 years. And so when I hear you say things like that constant cortisol and things that are going on, like I have anxiety like every day, and it scares me because I wonder, what is this doing to my body? You know, am I going to have a heart attack in the next 5 years? Am I going to not be able to survive and pay for things, you know, in the next 20, 30 years because I can't work anymore and my disability retirement is so low? And that just constantly keeps me always on edge. So I just don't, and at the end of the day, one of the other things is, and you've already alluded to it, you can't see it. You know, unless you're going to pay for one of those expensive tests, which most of us can't afford to, and the insurance companies aren't going to do anything about it. It's not a broken bone. It's not a gunshot wound. It's not anything that can be looked at and can be, you know, rated on some spectrum of, yeah, you were definitely damaged. And nobody wants to pay attention to that. So I would definitely love to circle back with you you know, another time and discuss this a little bit further, because it's just so invasive in our society.
Yeah, you know, I relate to a lot of what you're saying. Oh my God, we had to. So the private school that our son was at, where I was a teacher, is like over 100 years old. It's extremely wealthy. It's extremely prestigious. The politics of everybody was bending over backwards in the government to protect it from any information that might reach the 250 boarding families from all over the world that have gazillions of dollars, that abuse was occurring on their watch, and they had covered it up for at least a year. So that information couldn't come out. And so they were doing such a number on our son, like they, and the other kids that spoke up. For example, before our son went into grade 12, they published a bogus legal letter. It was absolute garbage. It was an embarrassment to read, but it was enough for, you know, my colleagues to just it was published to hundreds of people who put their heads down. But it basically said that the kids were liars. So on top of being kids that came forward to report the abuse that was done to them, which made them extremely vulnerable, these teachers were never removed. They weren't suspended for a single day, despite the fact that supposedly there was a big investigation going on. Can't do an investigation if the person's still in power, because no one will speak up. They're all too terrified, which is, you know, it's just textbook what they did. But Bill, to your point, we were like, okay, we got to get our kid out of Canada. He is not going to make it. He's not going to survive. So we sold our house. And so we too, we don't even have a house now. We're, you know, in our late 50s renting. And, you know, I don't care. Like, I've gone through the extreme anxiety like you have, and the absolute injustice. The injustice will eat you alive. At one point, you've just got to go, I would use bad language if I knew you guys better, but you just kind of have to go like, get lost. You know, you're going to do your corrupt thing, do it over there. I don't have time for you, and protect yourself. That's like, I'm just sharing like my own survival technique. Like I was put under investigation by my regulatory body, you name it. They tried to do everything. I had to hire a lawyer and pay for a lawyer to protect my own teaching certificate, because I was calling them out for being incredibly corrupt and abusive. It's the same thing that Bill's talking about. It's like, this is why I'm writing about gaslighting right now, because gaslighting can make you feel like you're the problem, you're crazy, you're riddled with anxiety, when in actual fact, no, it's them out there. And you be super clear on that distinction. you will work again. You are smart. You are creative. Circle back with me for sure. Like I'm going to be, if this prison program thing, this juvenile justice thing gets off the ground, if we get to work with prison officers, I'm going to need lots of people like you guys to be there on the ground working, who get it and who want to see change. So, I mean, I don't even have the funding yet, but it's something that we should think about and talk about and create community around. Like, I really, really believe that. But yeah, Bill, that's just, it's so gross. It's like, ugh, all of it just makes me just ill.
Can I share a story?
Yes, do jump
Hi,
in. And Miriam
thank you.
has something.
Do you want me to wait on Miriam? Or do you want me to go first, Miriam? Did you say Miriam?
It's Miriam.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'll
no,
just,
go ahead. I'll wait for
are you
you.
sure? Okay,
Yeah.
I'll try to be super concise. Because as I'm listening to this, it's like I just feel so much bubbling up inside, and I'm hearing all these phrases and all these words and all the things from all you guys, and then the stories, and I'm just like, holy cow! Like there's just so much that I feel, and I know you do too. Because like you said, we're all empathic, right? So, but I want to share a little story of hope because my son was at a private school too, and he was a young boy that would act out a lot when he was little. My husband's a 3-tour combat vet. And, there was some things that we were working through. But so this backs up what you said, everything about the neurological system and how it can be rebuilt. And I've said this and I swear to God, 9 out of 10 people look at me like I'm crazy when I tell them their kids can be everything they're meant to be and overcome this stuff. So I was proof of this. My son is because like he was a big kid too. I think it was you that said that, Jennifer. So he's 15 now, by the way, and he's 6'3" and 250. He's a big boy. But when he was little, he was a big kid. So he'd knock people over and he would get frustrated and he had different behavioral type things from just lashing out or who knows what. Well, anyway, the intermediate school district person that came in said, you know what, and sent an email to the principal and myself and said, and she professed this in life over him. He's going to end up in juvenile. She just went right down this path. He's going to end up in juvenile. He's going to this, he's going to that, blah, blah, blah. It's going to hurt you. He's going to turn on you. Now he's in second grade at the time. So I'm like, this is not our child. This is the same child that rescues little kittens, right? Like, I'm like, this is not. So I went to 3 psychiatrists and the first doctor wanted to put him on Ritalin right away. Let's just do that. And I said, did you do blood work? Did you do a brain scan? They thought I was crazy. So again, this is 12 years ago. They thought I was nuts. I'm like, why can't you do a brain scan? So thank you for what you said, because I think we all need to advocate for people and say, no, you can do it. And if it's $500, oh, well, let's figure it out because it's going to be a lifetime of brain altering medications if you don't. And so I did not do that. Went to 3 doctors. They said, maybe ADHD, maybe autism. Short version. I got in and I got involved and I researched dyes and chemicals and the pharmaceuticals and all the stuff that's going on and all of the synthetics in our foods and the chemicals. And I went to work and then I did a diet of nutritional things, omegas to help the brain. If criminals that are in prison right now that have committed crimes get a good, healthy brain recovery system, omegas, all the things, gut health, you can see changes and it's proven. Well, that happened with my son. And within 12 months, sensory issues were gone, undiagnosable for anything. And guess what? Now he's 15. He plays 8 instruments in band. He speaks Spanish. He plays football. He plays varsity hockey. He's obedient to the word of God because we're believers. And this kid is ministering to other kids all over the place. And if he would have went down this other path, what this woman said was completely false. And to go along with what all of you are saying is we are the light givers. We are the people that have to stand up for what's right out there. We have to be advocates for other. We have to find ways to help other people see in a world where, like Bill, I think it was Bill said, the government, the pharmaceuticals, there's so much money to be made there and they're so quick to just go down that path. And it's so much harder to go down another path of belief that, hey, if we alter some things, we can change this kid's life. Like we can help this adult. We can, at any stage, we can, because of what you said with the terminology about our brain and how, up to 25, like I'm learning so much from you guys. So thank you. But I feel like I did not fall into this Zoom by mistake. Like I am here for a reason. So I hope I can stay connected with you guys. But I'm telling you, this is a very important mission that we have here. And we need to help people, more people, because the government and the systems, and not to go that way too much, but what's in our foods, what's in our environments, very important. And the people we're around and who's buying into that toxic belief system. So thank you for what you're doing. I'm on board in any way I can be because I'm proof our son is doing it. He did it.
I want to say 1 second response to that total jolt of light and hope, Loretta, and then jump to Miriam. But the thing I wanted to say is, and this goes back to Bill too, I was going to talk about it later, but I'll just throw it in there right now. One of the things all of us can do, and the US military has offered this free to all of their reserves, to all of their active duty men, to their Navy, you name it. The US Armed Forces has bought this product. It's not a product, it's a brain training platform. So again, for people who are looking for something that can assess where the brain is at, so going back to what Bill was saying, like, how do I get to see where I'm struggling? And even better, you see where you're struggling, but then you can do brain training half an hour a day, online, gamified, $7 a month. It's Dr. Michael Merzenich's brain training program. It's called Brain HQ, brain headquarters, brainhq.com. You can go on for free and try it. But if you've got kids you're worried about or adults you're worried about, and you want to see where their brain is at, their working memory, processing speed, all the things that we should be finding out once a year when we go to our doctor, but we don't, you can do it through this program. It's designed by neuroscientists. It's been reviewed by 100 independent studies, like Johns Hopkins kind of studies. Like, it's awesome and it's cheap. It's $7 a month. The neuroscientists are trying to make it cheap. So it's another thing we can add to Loretta's idea about, and it's funny you'd say that about diet, because diet is one of the key things, and we want to build it into the juvenile justice program. Exactly as you say, if these kids have been given a really unhealthy diet, they're going to have gut problems, health problems, and brain problems. The brain needs really good protein. It needs omega-3s, like Loretta said, blah, blah, blah. There's way too much to talk about in terms of that, but it has to be this full picture thing, because brain and body are organic things. They're biological, and they have souls. So they're extremely complex. Miriam, you've waited forever. Sorry.
Hi, this is a great talk. Thank you. I'm in a public place, so if it's noisy, let me know and I'll have to move. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I've become very conscious of this way of interacting with people, but especially with kids. I mean, my goal is I'm an educator. I was for over 20 years in infant kindergarten, toddler and kindergarten. And my goal is in interacting with these students is to be able to listen to them, to validate them, because I feel at the very beginning stages of their lives, this is where the neurological development happens. And I feel that if at this point we take them on this trajectory to feel validated, to feel heard, and to have educators and parents, and to teach parents, because if you teach a child this way or you interact with him, it leads to healthy families and healthy communities. If we remember back in the 70s, at least with me being in elementary school, it was a very cookie cutter kind of education. And you had to be the same as everybody else, or you were shamed if you were not the same. And we steered away from that. In my education in a Reggio school, we learned very much conscious discipline. Have you heard of it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So with conscious discipline, it's how, the brain functions on the emotional, the survival emotional, and the executive, and how we have to develop these infants and toddlers so that it goes further in their lifetime. Because you know what? If there's generational trauma there, they take it on in the future with their families. And our parents or our grandparents, they didn't know what they didn't know. But now that we're conscious of it, I believe in correcting it. It actually reverts itself and corrects itself in the past. Like I know with me, unfortunately, I was in an abusive marriage and my kids went through a lot of trauma. In my becoming healthier and more conscious, my kids actually have done their own therapy and their own coming of themselves and forgiving me and saying, Mommy, you didn't know, but you know now, and we know ourselves. So that generational trauma from the past to me to my kids has changed, taken a different trajectory. So I believe like in little kids, it's building those neurological habits through physical habits. With my students, it would be if there was a fight over toys, I wouldn't say, I wouldn't have said, it was your fault. I mean, I wouldn't say that it was your fault, and that's it. I'm taking the toy away. It was allowing each child like 10 seconds or 20 seconds to state their case, what happened, and then letting the other child state their case while both children had to hear each other. And that's a kind of education and interaction, even with adults, we should be having. So right now, I took a change of career after 20 years of teaching. I'm actually now a doula. And I love being a doula because you know what? If you support those moms, and a lot of moms have trauma, or the way they're going to approach their child the minute that child is born. That child could be taken away from them. They might have a C-section and might not be able to connect. So I'm there hopefully to support those moms to make that connection initially so that child at that very moment has a chance of developing into that trajectory of healthy thinking, healthy behavior, like healthy actions, and obviously taking that into their families in the future. So it's being very conscious with everyone that you interact with, especially children, as an educator, as a parent. So those are my thoughts based on what you said.
Yeah, it's a perfect segue back into some of the slideshow and just the last kind of hurrah of things we're going to cover. It's a really good segue because I want to talk about exactly what Miriam's talking about. And it's a shift from moral ways of thinking and moral frameworks to medical. So it's an echo of what everyone's been talking about in the call, which is that the more we start to foreground the impact on brain and body of what's happening, the more we start to understand that, it's the less it's a punitive system and the more it's a health system, then we're going to advance better, I think. So we can jump, Amy, to the next slide. Thank you guys so much for all those amazing contributions and the work you're doing, and I love that idea of the unconscious physical body and brain acting. Like the nervous system is a lot of it's unconscious, and then when we put it together with our higher power, our mind or our spirit, I mean, there's kind of no holding us back. Where it's quite miraculous what we can do. So we can jump to the next slide. So yeah, what would happen if we move from moral? Not that we're not holding people accountable, but we move from moral to medical. Amy, are you there? Oh yeah. Sorry. So again, this is just brain scans to remind you, repetition at timed intervals is how we remember stuff. So again, look at the difference between a healthy brain and an unhealthy brain. As we said at the beginning, the more we start to make this visual for our very visual selves, the more we remember. And that we understand that when we are interacting with someone, we might be interacting with a traumatized brain, and they might be behaving the way they're behaving and treating us the way they're treating us because their brain is not functioning properly. It's dysregulated, and that manifests in a bunch of different ways we're going to look at. So, when we see the distressing kind of scan, just like if we could see the broken bone, we're going to have a much different reaction than if we don't know that the person is actually pretty profoundly hurt. So let's jump to the next slide. This kid looks like the kid we don't want our kids to be exposed to. We're worried. Why is he acting that way? He's going to hurt our child. We're very defensive. You can imagine this in the adult version, but much more sophisticated. The adult who uses all sorts of techniques and behaviors in order to oppress us in the workplace. Like we're talking, it's even at a systems level. It's so ingrained in our system. It feels like an epic battle. But what we're trying to do always is ask, is behavior a choice? In many cases, it's not. So this, and you guys are all experts in this, so we don't need to belabor the point. You know that this kid comes from a place where we've talked about it before. It's a survival strategy. Aggression is the way to stay safe. That can be different for all of us, and we're going to look at that. But if we could look at this kid's brain, not just his outside aggressive behavior, we would recognize right away he actually needs help. He needs a medical intervention. Like what Loretta was talking about with her son, the behavior is indicative that there's like pollutants, there's toxicity, there's maybe social emotional behaviors that are happening that like with the abusive husband that Miriam was talking about, or the abusive whole system that Bill was talking about, etc. We've heard from people how there's a lot out there for our brains and bodies to cope with. So let's jump to the next one. And I just use that title there, Return to Their Golden Potential, because of course that is Vincent Felitti and Robert Anda, the idea that children are born with golden health. And they're mostly focused on the body, but they have golden brains, they have golden bodies. And through our highly abusive system where, I don't know, we kind of lost our way, things take that gold and it's a reverse alchemy and it turns them into base metals. So we can return them though. The exciting thing is we can do Brain HQ, we can do a bunch of other things, which we're going to talk about at the end, and we can get better. So if we remain in the moral framework, we're all used to this. Abusers and bullies are bad. You know, the institutional complicity, it's bad. We all know this. Victims and targets are good. They're victims. They're good people that are getting victimized. A bunch of us live this in this world. We didn't do anything wrong, but we're targeted and we're victimized, and it's horrible, re-victimized. But if we shifted this to the medical framework, then we would see that every single person in this story is on the trauma spectrum. They're all under threat of some kind, and they're reacting. So we're not having the mindful responsiveness that we all know about. We're all in reactive state, and that's extremely hard on brain and body. And it obviously is not producing great things in our systems, our institutions, or our society internationally either. So we can jump, Amy, to the next. So we can have a nice person like, well, Mark Ruffalo is the actor. We can be a nice person like Mark, the actor, or we can turn into the Incredible Hulk. All of us have been there, or most of us have been there. Some people maybe are so like calm and gentle, they haven't. I have been there. I have been so infuriated that I have turned into a huge green, yelling, angry, spitting monster. Even with my own children when they scared me, because they scared me. And you hit a breaking point and unconsciously you were highly reactive. And then I've gone and apologized. I'm sorry I yelled, I was frightened, blah, blah, blah. There's no excuse for it really, but it's an unconscious thing that happens. We all know it. We go into fight mode. That's one way we can think about these individuals who are highly abusive. Even if it's very sophisticated abuse, they are in fight mode and they are going to find any way they can, narcissism, Machiavellianism, psychopathology, to shut down what they envision as a threat. Any one of us who speaks up, we threaten all of those people. That's why they come down on us like a ton of bricks. We haven't done anything wrong, but they are threatened and they will do everything in their power to shut us down, to silence us, to ensure that we are unsuccessful. And it's a natural nervous system response, fight. So if we start to think about them that way, they are less powerful. We get more strategic. We get more self-protective. We have more self-compassion. All of those things are going to make us healthier. When you are being treated badly like this, rather than trying to figure it out and ruminate and see, oh, if I'd done this, if I'd done that, or I regret that I didn't do this, I should have known, all of this craziness in our heads, let it go. They are acting out to preserve themselves, plain and simple. We don't need to overthink it. Now you need to get strategic. So we can go to the next one. We all know fight. We recognize it very quickly in animals. If you have been, and this is true for the nervous system, if the nervous system has been exposed to a series of threats, it absolutely wires it in. It decides, like an abused dog will decide that everyone that approaches it is going to abuse it. That's not accurate. That's what anxiety is, right? That's what depression is. Your system is making an incorrect prediction about what's going on, and it's not self-correcting. We have systems that are highly attuned to say, oh, there's a snake on the road, I better run. Oh, whoops, it's just a stick. That's a self-correcting prediction system. That's healthy. When you've been abused, you've been manipulated, you've been betrayed, all the things we're talking about on this call, what happens is you see the snake and you're gonna, my cortisol and adrenaline are pumping through me. I've got to fight, or I've got to run away, or I'm gonna freeze. And your whole nervous system is completely firing at all cylinders. But then you see that it's a stick, but your system doesn't calm down. Every stick you see is a snake. You can't see reality. You can't construct reality anymore in a healthy, safe way, which is really hard on your system. So remember that with dogs. Cats will do the same thing. Their claws are out, they hiss, they make it very clear to you that if you take one step closer, even if you just want to pat them on the head or give them a dish of food, they're going to attack. That's what's happened to human beings too. Human beings are creatures and their systems are absolutely out of whack. Do you have to overthink it? No, that person is in fight mode. be strategic, protect your own health, have self-compassion. So next one, Amy. We could also go into fight, freeze, fawning, and appeasement, which we'll take a look at. We can jump to the next one. So we'll just do it really quick. What does flight look like? Think about all your colleagues that drive you crazy because they're absent all the time, they procrastinate, they're distracted, they're non-productive, they're irresponsible, uncommitted, and unmotivated. Not really. They're in flight mode. They are in escapist mode because their system is just as out of whack as the person that's in fight mode. So again, keep thinking medical. Keep thinking, how can we help this person get better so that they can return to all their golden potential. So fight, flight, next one, freeze. We know this in the natural world. It's a very smart way to stay alive if you're a human being or if you're a rabbit. And you would all know this with your kids, that you think that they're safe because they're so quiet, they're so easy to handle, they're so nice, but actually you're seeing other signs like they don't ever speak up, they don't raise their hand, they don't share, they don't laugh. They in our teacher world, they burn out, or our nurses world and doctors world, they suffer from burnout. Our prison world, burnout. They're dissociated, they're not fully present. There's lots of warning signs of the freeze response. Once again, it's unconscious. It's our neuroception. It's how the polyvagal nerve is communicating through the brainstem. It's talking to the brain and it's talking to the body. And it's invisible what's happening. It just manifests as behaviors. And we keep being so moral and so judgmental. People are behaving in healthy ways. We're like, they're a good person. They have a good character. They're an upstander. They're successful. Well, no, they've probably been very, very lucky in many ways, very privileged in many ways, or they just are one of those lucky people with incredible resilience through difficulty. Nonetheless, it's not that they have such a great character. They're healthy. And all of us can keep working on getting our health back, even if we've really suffered. So the next one. This is the one that most people don't talk about. And this is the one that can help you be more forgiving and compassionate towards those involved in institutional complicity. Institutional complicity, many of us have experienced this on the call. We can't believe it's happening, but all of our colleagues, all of our friends, all of the people that have known us for years turn their backs on us as soon as we become the threat. When you become the threat by speaking up, you put everybody's system into fight, freeze, flight, and fawning and appeasement. Fawning and appeasement is blindness to betrayal. It's the way you survive. It's the way you keep your paycheck. It's the way you keep your pension. It's the way you keep your house. Most smart people are going to choose that over walking the speak up, integrity, whistleblower, commit the crime of telling the truth path. That's just the reality. 9% of the population are going to take that incredibly brutal road. For whatever reason, many people on this call have done it. And we all know how hard it is. And I personally believe there's a self-sacrifice involved, but I also believe there's a profound self-determination involved. And that's why we're all here together, because we can make change. We can do positive things. We have lived experience. We have passionate knowledge. And here we all are talking about it, and that's all good. So the fawning and appeasement people, they're just like the fighters, but they use they keep their eyes down. They look the other way when abuse is occurring. They will support openly the bully, the abuser, and the institution. They will defend them to the death against you as the threat. They don't care that you're telling the truth. And they will be the bystanders. And they will be the beneficiaries. They'll get the promotions. They'll get the better job. They'll get the pay increases. You name it. They get lots of benefits for what they do. And we're all trying to survive. So in this medical vision, everybody's got a part to play in the nervous system, unconscious, massive reaction. That doesn't mean they shouldn't be held accountable. Everybody needs to be held accountable. I'm a big believer in that. I'm not trying to say, oh, you just let it all go and it's all just medical and it's all just fine. No, it's not. It's never okay to hurt anybody else, ever. So, but it's complicated. There's no quick, easy solutions to this one. There's no villain and hero. There's a very big gray area of human brain and body that we're trying to navigate. And I believe this is one of our huge obstacles. This is what makes it hard. There's no pill. You can't go here, take Ritalin, and now your kid is going to be well behaved. Doesn't work that way. And that's why the harder path sometimes is the better one. So we can jump to the next one, Amy. So again, I wanted to ask you guys, but I don't think we're going to have enough time. You know, would it be better, like part of our trauma informed, part of our trauma responsive and preventative, wouldn't it be better if we started in with 5-year-olds, as Miriam's talking about, when we work with little ones and we just start at the very beginning and we start teaching them that when they are in fight mode, this is because they feel threatened. They don't feel safe. They feel that they have to fight for the toy, if you want to talk about 5-year-olds, or they go into flight mode. They can't go to school. They can't get out of bed. And it's not because they're a bad person. It's not because they're lazy. It's not because they're not trying. It's because they're feeling really unsafe. They feel threatened, and their body and brain are telling them to hibernate, to stay safe. And then same with freeze and fawning. Why are you fawning? Why are you being blind to betrayal? Because you know, it's like, you guys probably all know about Stockholm syndrome, where hostages will show lots of care and affection for their captors. It's a survival strategy. They don't care and love their captors. They know that their captors could kill them. And so, of course, they're going to be very charming and caring and kind and fawning and keep their eyes down, because that's how you survive. And all of us are trying to survive. So my big question to you was, maybe just hold it in the back of your head, and if we have time at the end, we'll go to it. Would it help us if we started talking more medical, not just moral, not just the stigma of mental illness, but the medical aspect of mental illness and behaviors and why we do what we do? Okay, Amy, we can jump to the next one. This is the picture. I have been trying to support Deb and Vicky in their passionate and really, like, kind of shockingly successful attempt to capture lawmakers and the Senate's attention to changing laws to protect people way better at work who are not protected right now. And so I wrote in a letter to the editor of the Boston Globe, and this was the picture they attached to publishing my letter. So all I did in the letter was say all the stuff that we're talking about today, which is like, and I mean, here's the gist of it. If it's against the law to hurt an employee's body at work, why is it legal to harm their brain and their nervous system? Is it because the damage is invisible? I mean, these are the big questions that we need to be asking in society right now. Why, if we can't see the damage, is the damage okay? Like, it's kind of nutty when you unpack it that way. Anyways, the Boston Globe, they liked it. They published it. And as soon as I finish this call today, I'm going to do another 2-page piece for them, just giving Deb and Vicky the science, just to see if we can keep pushing this institutional complicity piece and psychological safety in the law. It's pretty exciting. If we can make these changes, it should have a ripple effect. Okay, so we can jump to the next one. I just want to give you a quote by Dr. Stephen Porges. He says, and he's just a neuroscientific genius like the rest of them, but basically he teaches us, when he teaches us about polyvagal theory, that the impact of trauma, and that's all forms of trauma, all forms of abuse and bullying, it's not isolated to the brain. It stretches through our nervous system to virtually every part of our body, changing how our senses sense, how our organs operate, and just about every aspect of our physical and mental health. And yet, there's nothing that protects us in the workplace. We don't do a good job of protecting our kids. I mean, it's crazy. So we can jump to the next one. So while we're waiting for legal change, which is very, very hard work to make happen, but it's looking better and better, what are the hurdles to trauma preventative and trauma responsive in the form of, because, and all of these things are dealt with in depth in my book. I marshal all the science, the brain science, body science, to explain and support why these 4 things are incredibly helpful in terms of repairing brain and body after trauma. And they're also preventative. Like, the more you do aerobic fitness, the more you reduce the cortisol, the stress hormone in your brain. And you replace it with BDNF, which stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And BDNF is like a fertilizer for your brain. It's unbelievably healthy. And getting cortisol out of your brain and body is one of the best things you can do. How do you do it? Aerobic fitness. Doesn't cost anything. Put on some running shoes, go running, skating, swimming, biking, hiking, walking super fast, doesn't matter. You get your body moving. It's incredibly helpful for recovering from trauma and from preventing the harm that it does. Mindfulness, ancient Eastern practice, the neuroscientists have finally studied it in depth, and they're like, yep, they were right 2,000 years ago. Mindfulness is really, really good for you. Empathy, you guys already have lots and lots of empathy. I want to teach you one quick small thing that I found very useful about empathy. And just on that note, I write a regular column or a regular article for Psychology Today. It's called the Bullied Brain series. So Bullied Brain, if you just put in Psychology Today, Bullied Brain, my name, if it doesn't come up, you'll find I write articles about all this stuff all the time. And I just recently did an article on how we have to understand that empathy has two different forms. And if we don't understand the two different forms, we can be susceptible to highly abusive people. And I don't have the time to go into the science and everything today, but if you need any of that info, it's just sitting out there on the internet. And obviously my book is full of this stuff. Brain training, we already talked about. We'll talk a bit more about it now for fun, but brain training or brain fitness, like going to the brain gym for half an hour a day, doing the online exercises, they're hard, I'll tell you that. It's things like working memory, concentration, pattern identification, but it's incredibly healthy for your brain. And then we don't have time to talk about, but just trust me when I tell you that activities that you do in companionship with other people, like singing and dancing, drumming, yoga, acting, are all co-regulating. We are able to co-regulate one another's nervous systems. And we co-regulate children's nervous systems by the way in which we have facial expression, we use our eyes, we use our gestures, the tone of our voice, the gentleness and love in our voice, and in the way our speech patterns are. And that can absolutely take a heightened nervous system. We just looked at people's ramped up nervous systems. You can help someone come down by co-regulating. And that's why human beings love to do activities together, because all of these things are very helpful to make us reach a brain state where we feel safe, and then we can do all the amazing brain things like be creative and connect and problem solve and innovate and all these kinds of things. So we can jump to the next one. This is just a quick, I'm just going to circle back super fast and just remind you of all these things we can do for our health, like aerobics. So there's Jane Fonda from back in the day in the 1980s. It's time for us to have a brain fitness revolution. In the 1980s, we had a fitness revolution. It changed the workplace, changed how people understood their health. Okay, we jump to the next one. Aerobics was super fun. It wasn't heavy-handed, it wasn't depressing, it wasn't hard, it wasn't judgmental, it wasn't like PE classes are much too often in schools. It was fun, and it was full of choice, and you did it with other people. And this is how we need to introduce brain fitness. It needs to be fun, non-judgmental, caring, something we do as a community and talk about. And that's part of co-regulation. We can go to the next one. As we said, brain science confirms what we know. Mindfulness is incredibly good for our brains. If you can carve out 20 minutes to half an hour a day, the research is shocking how much it reduces your stress. It reduces stress in the brain and body. It's incredible. So we can jump to the next one. I see that popped up in the chat, absolutely music. Didn't put that down, and it's absolutely right. Whoever's sharing, yes, music therapy is key, art therapy, coloring, mindfulness and coloring put together. It's referred to by a neuroscientist as coloration. That's really good for your brain and body. It can bring anxiety levels like way down. One of the things to remember about mindfulness and why it's so effective is when you start to do slow, deep breathing, not panicky breathing or shallow breathing, when you're doing slow, deep breathing, basically you're telling your brain that there's no predators around, it's completely safe. The more your brain feels that there's no danger around it, the more it can start to do all kinds of things like regulate the body, calm the system down, activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which the neuroscientists call rest and digest. As you all know, of course, sleep problems and digestive problems are key components of the stressed out system, the sympathetic nervous system. It's in our own power through fitness and mindfulness and brain training and empathy and working, like co-regulating with others, to completely calm that system down, activate our parasympathetic nervous system, and get way better rest and way better digestion. So we can jump to the next one. Empathic listening is a very, it's probably something you guys are all experts in, but just to cover it super fast, you can do exercises with people who, especially if they're all ramped up, you can do an exercise where the person they speak, like imagine doing this with a teenager or in a marital disagreement or something, they speak, and instead of responding to them, you repeat what they say. You are listening so closely that you try to repeat word for word what that person is telling you so that you're really tuned in. You're not thinking of your rebuttal. You're not thinking to argue. You're not thinking to interrupt. No, you are listening and repeating. And when the person reaches, they speak for a minute or two, you repeat. They speak for a minute or two, you repeat. At the end, they say, I feel heard. And when they feel heard, then it's your turn. You speak and they repeat. It can be incredibly effective and emotional to really let someone tell you why they did what they did or why they feel what they feel and why they're acting the way they're acting. And you're not arguing, you're just listening on a really deep level. It's an incredible technique. So I highly recommend it. We can jump to the next one. Okay, I told you I was going to do a fast thing on empathy, and I wrote an article about this just recently that's more in depth if you're interested. One of the things that completely threw me off is I couldn't understand, how can a human being have empathy in the brain, but then turn it off? How can you have empathy and then switch it off and be mean and cruel and destructive? Like, I couldn't understand the two-faced behavior that you see with abusive individuals. You know, people who gaslight, people who are institutional complicity people, they cover up their, etc. I just couldn't get it. And it got explained to me by a neuroscientist. There are two kinds of empathy. We have cognitive and affective empathy. They now know from brain scans that people who are abusive, people who cover up, like the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde people, they've got two personas. One is acting, telling you right to your face how much they care about you. The next minute they're doing something highly destructive to destroy you. You're like, what? How can you be the same person in one system? Those people have advanced cognitive empathy. It can be seen on a brain scan. What they're missing is affective empathy. Affective empathy is when you feel someone else's feelings. You feel their pain, you feel remorse and guilt and so on. You could never do something that would hurt them because you couldn't stand the guilt. It's that type of thing. So when you're trying to figure out why someone is being highly destructive, it could be that they have cognitive empathy. They're very strategic. They're clever. They lie. They're pathological liars. They're good at covering up. They're good at manipulating. And they don't have any guilt. They don't have any remorse. Really, their brain is very dysregulated. And again, there's not much, you can't help them. You can't fix them, but you need to know about them to keep yourself healthy and safe and sane, because it can make you feel crazy when people are two-sided, two-faced. We can jump to the next one. So this is just a super quick thing. We've covered it already, so we'll just go through it. Skip it. Basically, this is what brain training does, the Brain HQ. If you want to take a look at it, it helps your working memory, cognitive flexibility, self-regulation, and fast processing speed. And it's hard work. It's like exercise. To get good at it, you have to do it every day, half an hour, and you can get way better at doing it. So we can jump to the next one. I already told you, Dr. Michael Merzenich has done research that shows how much this kind of brain training can really, really help. So we can jump to the next one. This is just a cute reminder of how brain training works. This is a picture of your famous quarterback, Tom Brady. Tom Brady's trainer phoned up the neuroscientists back in the day, a couple of years ago or more. Alex Guerrero is the trainer, and he phoned the office and he just said, you guys do know that Tom Brady uses your brain training, right? He uses Brain HQ every day. And they were like, what? And they all went and visited because they wanted to see him in action. And he built it into his TB12 method, and he shared it with the whole world. Most athletes, elite athletes that use the brain training program, don't tell anybody because it gives them a huge competitive advantage. The only other athlete that's gone public with his use of it is Harry Kane, the very, very famous British striker in soccer. But Tom Brady, it's just so indicative of our society. He was chosen 199th in the draft. 199th, like last practically. Nobody thought that he was going to do anything because he didn't have the physicality that they associated with being the greatest quarterback in the world. What he had was an incredibly advanced brain. And if you think about it, to be a quarterback, you have to have an incredibly advanced brain and great physicality. So he's just a good example, along with the armed forces of America, if we want to be tough, of using brain training to have high performance, health, and happiness in the brain. So you can jump to the next one. Brain training and safety allow for peak performance. So in all the workplaces that tell you that caring about people or caring about whistleblowers or striving for really psychologically safe environments is not going to help their bottom line. Well, first of all, that's not backed up in the research. The research shows that the more you have whistleblowers and you protect and care for them, the better your profitability is in the workplace. And same thing with psychology and diversity and all these things. This shows that you have a much healthier, more high-performing workplace. So again, this is why the research is important. And then, yeah, that we've already talked about this, striving for change. I was telling you that I'm really working hard in these areas, trying to see if we can get a diversion program off the ground, a school juvenile justice kind of joint effort and funding to see if we can shift school to prison into school to career. I've been working with trying to help teachers with burnout. As you know, we're losing teachers very rapidly. Trying to change from the legal point of view, support the big game changers in the legal world, but also like get in with human resources and help them navigate these kinds of traumas, and then ultimately public health as well. I have a presentation coming up, and that's the first time public health across Canada has reached out to me. So that's kind of exciting too, and it shows that there's change. So there's just the final slide then. Oh, well, if we have, I don't know I can't see the time on my computer, but if we have time, I want to just hear again all your ideas for overcoming hurdles that are stopping us from fully eradicating all this preventable trauma to brain and body. And if we know what the obstacles are, like I saw people, I only get a flash, but I saw people talking about money and pharmacy, and these are the huge issues, how people are very highly abusive end up in very powerful positions, and trying to move them from that is hard. But if we know there are obstacles, what could we do to change them is just sort of the big picture question again, if we have time to talk still. And then Amy, just the last slide. Oh God, I keep thinking it's the last slide and it's not. The brain learns by repetition. Oh yeah, okay, so we already covered all this. This is just work that I do. These are some of the things that I think that we can use to make change, like making our policies and procedures at work or at schools or in sports organization living documents, not just on the shelf gathering dust where they don't protect anybody. And also just all of us to remember that the brain learns by making mistakes. And when people make mistakes and we're using the health framework, can we have compassion for the fact that they feel unsafe, they feel threatened, and they're lashing out in whatever form, or they're withdrawing? Can we do that, especially with our kids and our teenagers? Can we do that? And then I swear this is the last one. Yes, thank goodness. Okay, this is the last. This is just me. Exit the cage to learned helplessness. And then if you take the slides off, Amy, then we can see if we have time to talk still, or am I out of time? Oh, we've got 5 minutes, 6 minutes. So jump in there, everybody.
That was great, Jen. 6 minutes left. And wow, you gave us so much great information. That was just incredible.
I was getting a bit worried near the end.
You did it. You rocked it.
Yeah. Thank goodness.
I really believe, honestly, that any change that we're going to have has to be grassroots. And I thank you for spearheading that and doing this.
You know what? I totally agree with you. I've given up on the system. I walked around in temper tantrum about the broken system. And then I was just finally, exactly, I'm with you. It's got to be grassroots. There's power in numbers. We don't have to just keep letting those on high, which are an absolute minority, tell us how to think and feel and act. I agree. It's got to be grassroots.
So many good things in the chat that I didn't see, like sleep. I think sleep, right there with you, Kathy, sleep is so underestimated in its importance to your mental health, your physical health, huge one.
Yeah.
I also had seen earlier, Steph, I think it was you who put in about the shame that comes when you're victimized and feeling, right? Like, to me, that's such a big part of just the whole ideology of this. People, no matter what the circumstances, when you're victimized, you feel this shame that you don't deserve. And it's so destructive. And just, I love to take every opportunity to tell people that their shame is not deserved. It's harming them. And please don't, whatever you can do to not internalize these feelings is the healthiest thing for you. We don't want you to turn on yourself with shame and harm.
Yeah, Amy, I'm just going to add a fast neuroscience piece to that I think is really helpful. It helped me. Is shame is really when your community makes you feel, or you yourself feel like you don't belong. And when you don't belong, the brain interprets that as you being at threat, like literally your life is at threat, because the only way humans survive is by being in community. We can't live alone. We have to be in community and in connection. So despite the fact that you feel like withdrawing when you feel that shame, not belonging feeling, the healthiest thing you can do is as much outreach as humanly possible. Join a volunteer group, get on a bike club, whatever it is, create new community. I mean, I had to create new community because my community turned on me, and it's okay. We can always reinvent. The brain is very good at connecting. But yeah, the shame is a not belonging feeling. And that's really dangerous, as Amy says.
Go ahead, Kathy, jump in. Or Miriam, if she's faster.
So
I have a quick, oh, sorry. I have a quick question. When and if you pursue the legal route for change, how can we get involved in supporting you or actively being involved?
Well, I mean, I'm connected to Amy. So through your community, I'm not sure, it's really like early stages. We're just in conversation with funding partners and with the juvenile justice judge. So there's nothing even on paper. We're just in meetings, but I'm really hopeful. Michael Merzenich's very hopeful that we can do this. And he's the father of neuroplasticity. So I figure people will listen at some point. But yeah, thank you for caring about it. And let's just see how it unfolds.
And Deb is here. She's the workplace abuse specialist. So I'm hoping she'll put in the chat a way to get in touch with her as well. We love
Thank you.
People want to get involved with that. Sorry, Kathy.
Sure, I want to jump in super quick. I went to the Museum of Science and they had a talk, and they had a really interesting research study. And it was basically like you flipped a coin, and if you flipped the coin one way, you had a task would take you 2 minutes. If you flip the coin another way, the task would take 10 minutes. So obviously people are going to want to cheat on this. And what the research did was sort of show them that people cheated. They judged themselves less for cheating and their team less for cheating. But then, but it was just interesting how the judgment toward themselves and their team, if the people see you as part of the team. But on the other hand, if it's someone else, oh my God, we judge the other, we're okay, but the other people off our team, the other people, like, so that it was just very interesting how it really became me and my team are good and you and your team are good, even if we've cheated, the difference in judgment. So I like to see people educated about that, because I think people don't understand when they're judging the whistleblower, there may actually be a reason you're doing that, and it doesn't actually have to do with the whistleblower. It has to do with your brain.
I think that's such an important point. And I would just add to that, it's really a lot of what I'm seeing in my work on the gaslighting is that one of the ways you can recognize a person gaslighting you at work or in your personal life or politically or any of these things is it's exactly as Kathy's outlining. They will present to you the wrongdoer. They will tell you that so-and-so, such and such a group is your enemy. And, we're seeing this in international politics in terrible ways right now, where one group gets dehumanized, they get vilified, they have no empathy is being directed even to their children. And you're just kind of like, how can this be happening? And it's as Kathy says, our brains are wired. There's an actual neuroscientific term for what you're describing, and I can't remember what it is, but it has something to do with bias, like you're biased to forgive yourself in your group, and you are biased to be not like have tribal empathy, like not relate to people that aren't like you. You have less empathy for them. And it's very, very dangerous in the 21st century. In evolution, it was great because if someone arrived on your island and they were from a different tribe and they might kill you, you needed to know that. You needed to recognize they were different from you. In the 21st century, in a global world, we need to find all of our commonalities and have self-compassion, but compassion for others, all others. That's the only way the human race is going to survive, and our planet is going to survive.
That's a beautiful way to end then, Jen. Because it's 2:01, and I know that people have already dropped off, because I'm sure we're just so appreciative of all the time you've given us. 2 hours on this topic. This was incredible, Jennifer. I hope everyone goes out and buys your book. Do a review on Amazon about the amazingness of Jennifer Frazier. We really do need this to get out there, and I so deeply grateful. I know lots of people will watch it on the recording. And yeah, you've given us so many ways, like next steps, ways to get involved. It couldn't have been more perfect. So grateful for you. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Well, thank all of you guys. I love to be the person that's sharing the science, and you guys were an amazing group, such great ideas. All the work you're doing is so impressive, and your courage is so impressive, and your integrity. It's really, for someone like me in my world, it's very reassuring that there's just such amazing people on the ground taking the hard path of doing the right thing and bringing this positive change. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you all. Goodbye. The love is real. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Amy.
Thanks so much, Jennifer.